Today, I want to take a look at different stages of wealth accumulation and the opportunities that I see at each stage. So, no matter where you're starting from, I hope you'll find inspiration today as we acknowledge the many ways you can make progress regardless of your net worth. Now, of course, no generalizations are going to exactly match your personal situation. What I'm discussing here is naturally an oversimplification, as it must be, in order for it to apply broadly to as many people as possible. But even though each person's situation will be different, the main thing I think you can glean from this is a way of thinking about what might be possible in your not so distant future. We're going to take a look at 6 net worths, and we're going to assume that these are liquid, meaning that there's no penalty to access them, such as might be the case if the money were in a retirement account, for example, before age 59 and a half. So we'll assume that this net worth is liquid and can be accessed quickly. Stage 1, 0. We're starting from 0. Those who are starting from a 0 net worth, or even sometimes a negative net worth if student loans outweigh assets, for example, then you are your biggest asset. Since there is no money presently to invest, what you have is your time, energy, and ambition. Here are 2 ways you can invest in yourself. 1, you can invest in financial education around budgeting and debt elimination. Number 2, you can invest in education and experience in your preferred career field. For most individuals, I believe there is a very achievable goal for each of these points. Using methods of debt payoff and budgeting, I believe in targeting a 15% monthly cash flow surplus. If you have significant student loans or a low income, this might prove more difficult in the beginning. In fact, it probably will. So first, prioritize debt payoff, going from smallest to largest balance, alongside building a small emergency fund to create breathing room. Balance the budget, and that's the most important thing. Balancing the budget is most important. Creating the cash flow surplus is where you will begin the journey leading beyond your current situation. For that second point, gaining additional education and experience in your career field, this improves your chances of landing a higher paying job or getting a raise at your present one. This could include things like taking additional courses, learning new software or other relevant skills, job shadowing, and even hiring a career coach or a job recruiter to help you navigate into the right job for you that pays well. If you can budget a 15% surplus with your current wages or salary, then any future raises can only improve that surplus. A good rule of thumb that I like to use when saving money, in the early days especially, is to split any future raises 50-50. Save 50%, spend 50% of that new excess income. The eventual goal that I suggest is building to a monthly surplus of 30% of net take-home pay. It's big. Yes, it is. But saving this aggressively should build a fund that equals around 100% of your annual income after about the 3rd year. This assumes some risk to earn interest and growth, which can be unpredictable. But given average returns, 3 years should be approximately doable. And 3 years is close enough that you can stay disciplined and excited about what that would mean for your doors of opportunity. Stage 2 is $50,000. Once you've accumulated $50,000, you have enough to hit the ground running with a low-cost startup or even a franchise business. You can branch out on your own. You can use it as a down payment on a house, or you can allow the $50,000 to simply accumulate until the right opportunity comes along. Now, it's important to remember that an emergency fund covering 3 to 6 months of basic living expenses is critical to a well-rounded financial plan. It's critical to managing risk properly. So remember that at least 3 months should be covered at all times. Don't spend your emergency fund on a small business. That's separate. So here I'm going to assume that you have built $50,000 in addition to the emergency fund amount. This $50,000 is specifically meant for opportunities, not emergencies. It's important to keep those separate. Depending on the business, there will be a wide range of what startup costs might look like. An online A tech-based or even a physical service-based business with few equipment needs might cost typically anywhere between 5 and 40,000 in the first year. Now, for businesses requiring inventory, physical locations, or a broad range of equipment, this could easily surpass that range. So additional investors or lenders or time to save would be needed at that stage. This 50,000 can be used for such things as courses to help define and narrow your unique selling proposition. What is it you're offering and exactly what makes it different? This helps you start with a very targeted idea, one that big companies may not have room to compete for. And this gives you an early edge on the market. Coaches or consultants can help you with the specific details of how to get started without wasting too much time and money not knowing what you're doing and trying to figure it out yourself. The legal setup, licenses, tools, equipment, and programs can also usually be afforded within this budget of 50,000, unless of course it requires major inventory or expensive equipment and location. Early marketing efforts can also be started on this budget, building an audience that's excited about what's coming. It also gives you early feedback on whether there is good market fit and people are willing to commit to future purchases by offering early bird discounts and other perks. Now remember, starting a business carries risks, with many failing in the first few years. You can help mitigate this risk by validating your idea early on with market research and starting small. That's what this $50,000 budget can help you do. Stage 3, 250,000. If you have 250,000, you may have enough to buy a small business which is already running a profit. The great thing about this is that you're buying time and buying an idea that has worked and resonated with people already. It takes some of the early guesswork, trial and error out of the game. Now, of course, 250,000 is usually plenty to start a small business with, assuming it's a small business again without big needs for inventory, expensive locations, expensive equipment, and so on. Businesses often sell for anywhere between 20 and 40 times their monthly earnings, depending a lot. It depends on variability of that income, the diversity of the income sources, the risk, owner involvement, internal systems, and brand name recognition, among other things. Of course, the lower multiple businesses are going to require more from the owner to keep that business afloat because they're seen as riskier. Those with the higher multiples are generally viewed as more stable and less risky for one reason or another. So let's assume a 40 times business, a 40x business that we can buy. Let's go with that higher end. 200,000 of the 250,000 that we have could buy something that earns on average about $5,000 a month net profit. Now that's pre-taxes, and an after-tax amount could easily cut in to 25% or more of that number. So let's say we net after taxes $3,750 a month with that $200,000 purchase. And spending $200,000 on a business leaves $50,000 there as a buffer, as each month is of course going to vary, probably especially in the early days, as you figure out what you're doing. And now that's of course not enough to live on yet, but twice that number might be, depending on your preferred standard of living. And working with a coach or even the previous owner to learn the path toward doubling that income can set you on course to achieve that. Something at 20x monthly earnings is often going to require full-time attention, like an e-commerce business, and that would require someone in the household to make that like their full-time job. Now, a 20x business for 200,000 could buy someone a $10,000 a month average income, or maybe it's 7,500 after taxes, depending on business structure, filing status, credits, debits, so on. So $7,500 a month after tax might be enough to cover expenses depending on your lifestyle. Now, if there's a dual income in the household, one person could work the business while the other works their day job. And together, over even just a couple years, they might be able to save away a good portion of those business earnings to build back up those savings and investments for future growth of the business. Stage 4, $500,000, $500,000. Now we're getting to a point where it's pretty clear some of the things that can be done. $500,000 is enough to spend, let's say $400,000 on a business purchase. And even at 40x earnings, that makes an average maybe of $10,000 a month, leaving $100,000 as a buffer and a business emergency fund. $500,000 is also enough for startup costs in many different franchises if you wanted to go that route. Now, of course, earnings here are more limited due to the royalties and the marketing fees that are ongoing, and you don't have full control over the operation of a franchise business. But in exchange, you do get the benefit of brand recognition and a proven business plan. Of course, there's no guarantee of success even with franchises, but it does offer a slightly less risky approach with the benefit of training from those who have already run the business successfully. And it usually comes with quality systems that have been developed to be repeatable and scalable. So finally, $500,000 in a taxable account can simply act as a discretionary fund for your personal use. If you think about a 4% rate of annual withdrawal, that means $20,000 per year could be available to you pretty much indefinitely to use however you wanted. You want to take a vacation? It's there for you. Want to buy something extra special for Christmas? You have it there. Maybe it's time to replace the car. There's a big portion of that cost and maybe all of it, depending on what you're buying. And that 20,000 would likely be higher in the future as the fund grows, assuming that it's invested properly and diversified. And in that way, it's also likely to keep up with inflation. Of course, this type of withdrawal rate assumes a diversified stock and bond portfolio, but market downturns could reduce the portfolio's survival time frame, so consulting a financial advisor is a major key to managing risks properly to your situation, and being conscious of reducing discretionary withdrawals during market downturns also can significantly improve that long-term sustainability of the fund. Stage 5, $1 million. That's the big milestone. Everybody wants to get there. $1 million alone might for some people even be enough to bridge the gap to retirement simply as an investment fund. So if you think about this example, if someone were, let's say, 50 years old with monthly expenses of $7,000 net of taxes, and if we assume an inflation rate of 3% going forward, and an average effective tax rate of 15%. That could include capital gains, dividends, interest, and the untaxed principal, which they'd also be withdrawing. They might draw from a $1 million investment fund, averaging 7% annually, for about 13 to 14 years before it depleted to zero, depending, whether withdrawals are made toward the beginning or the end of the year. That could either increase the years or slightly decrease them. So the disclaimer here, though, is 15% is a broad assumption for taxes. It could easily be higher or lower, depending on the portfolio. But under these assumptions we're using, it brings this person past the age of 59 and a half when they can access their retirement accounts, and it brings them past the age of 62 when early Social Security comes available. How long it lasts depends on a lot of things, though, including the order in which markets perform negatively versus positively. And it runs a very real risk of early depletion. So this by itself is not a very good or efficient use of money, but what they could do instead is a hybrid model where they buy a small business for, let's say, $400,000, which earns them maybe $7,500 net per month after taxes, and then allow the additional $600,000 to continue growing pretty much untouched, except for emergencies, maybe some business investment, discretionary spending from time to time. But growing at a 7% annual return on average, that $600,000 could be nearly double in 10 years' time. And remember, if the business remains healthy, it still remains an asset that might be sold in the future when you're ready for something new. If they wanted to build a business from scratch, this gives them flexibility also to float expenses in the early years if they wanted to live off the investments while they build the business full time, before there are any positive earnings. But the risk is a failure for the business to gain traction, and the money used to fund those early years essentially becomes a sunk cost. A more logical option might be to go part-time at their day job, keeping a basic income source coming in while they dedicate the rest of their time to building the business from scratch. A $1 million net worth, excluding their primary residence, also gives someone the status of what's called an accredited investor, which opens up other investment opportunities in early stage companies that are not available to the common investor. Stage 6, $2 million. Now we're multimillionaires. At this price point, most opportunities are open to you. Of course, here you easily qualify as an accredited investor for startup companies. You can buy into most franchises. You can buy small businesses that more than cover expenses. You can live on $2 million invested at an average 7% growth rate for a long time, probably close to 40 years, depending on markets, inflation, and expenses. Another thing you could do at this price point is buy rentals to fund your lifestyle. But rentals have their own risk associated with them, separate from the risk posed by stocks. And over the long term, they don't typically have a major edge over stocks. They could just as easily underperform as outperform, or equal them approximately in average return. So while it is a decent way to diversify, I'd be careful of putting too much emphasis on rental properties alone. And finally, while I'm a huge advocate for small business ownership, it's still critically important for total wealth to be diversified. You don't want your entire future depending on your one industry or your own efforts. Businesses can accelerate wealth accumulation, but diversifying further among stocks, bonds, and other assets to spread that risk is extremely important, especially at higher net worth levels. So, in conclusion, I hope this gives you a laddered way of thinking about the different opportunities that arise at these stages of wealth accumulation. This is by no means a comprehensive list. It simply acts as a way of exploring the sorts of opportunities that present themselves at each stage of the journey. It's all about consistency and out-of-the-box thinking. Investing in the stock market is important, but investing in yourself, especially in the early years, and investing in small business and income-producing assets once some of that wealth has been accumulated is key to exponentially fast-tracking your growth and placing you en route to possibilities well beyond what you personally can produce in trading time for money. The key is to start somewhere, wherever you are now, and to be willing and ready to make mistakes in order to grow and learn. Count it as a real-world education, which is the most valuable kind of education that someone can get in the world of business. In the words of Jeff Bezos, he said, given a 10% chance of a 100 times payoff, you should take that bet every time. That means mistakes are going to be made. Failures and missteps are going to happen. But if 9 out of 10 times fail, the one that succeeds with 100 times payoff could easily make the whole journey worthwhile. With an investor's mindset, you can build an extraordinary lifestyle by taking disciplined steps towards goals of this nature.